All right, here we go. Ready? What? Regarden Gerdagum, Feud Kuninga, Thrimja Frunan, Huda Atherlingus Ellen Fremedon. Of shield shaving, Shethena Threatum, Monium Magdum, Medo Sette of Teach. Sor Erlas, Silen Erest Werth, Fea Shaft Funden. Das Frovra Jabad, Wax under Woknum, Werth Mindum Thach. Och that him I whilch thara sittendra over hran rada, huran schulda, gomban guldan. That was God Kuning.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, what's up, bookworms? Mike back with my good friend Philip here. We're going to talk about this story you may have heard of. It's written around the time about in between like 700. I love a story where they don't even know what year it was written. So in between like 700 and 1000 AD. Of course, this is disputed. Obviously, we don't have real good historical keepings at that time. So Philip, I'm excited. We've been talking about doing this forever now, and I'm ready to be educated. Are you ready to teach me some things about Beowulf here?
Oh man, this is just going to be fun. That's what this is going to be.
I think so. I actually went into it kind of treating it like it was homework, and I had a really great time with it. And I think that's at this point, I got to wonder, this is a story that was written that long ago. The manuscript was damaged in 1731. And this is obviously like great influence on just about every kind of fantasy we've ever read. I mean, I got to wonder, is this the first story about like slaying a dragon? Is this where that all started?
Well, there are older stories in Germanic mythology, legend, that sort of thing. So there is Sigurd, the dragon slayer, and the story of he was probably one of the greatest heroes of the North. And he was he's actually alluded to in Beowulf. There's a section where a bard, after Beowulf kills Grendel, spoiler everybody, there's a section where they're celebrating and a bard breaks into a song, and he's singing the song of, actually in the Beowulf manuscript, it's Sigmund, but in the Old Norse tradition, it's his son Sigurd, who is the dragon slayer, and he slays Fafnir. And this story is, although the manuscripts that we have are later than the Beowulf manuscript, the story itself is in some ways probably older, although the age is it's a debatable thing, as you said. I mean, we don't know exactly when the Beowulf story was first penned, so to speak. It certainly borrowed a lot from oral formulaic tradition from many centuries before. And so the story of Sigurd is just as old, and it's probably the most famous dragon slaying in all of Germanic lore. So, but this is the second most famous, I think. So
I think I read the Seamus Heaney translation in high school. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that's the one that they were passing around schools at the time. Didn't make as much sense to me. Again, I don't know if I was just a dummy teenager or what, but at the time, I would like to revisit it. That's why I have it. But with this, guys, we are going to be talking about the J.R.R. Tolkien translation. And yes, this is going to be spoilers, guys, because I feel like if you haven't read a 1300-old story by now, that's kind of on you. People feel like they can spoil Lord of the Rings for you, and they're like, yeah, it's like 70 years old. This has got that by a few centuries. So it's going to happen. But I don't think that really matters with a story like this. I think with a story like Beowulf, it's about taking it in. It's about the consuming this greatly historical feat here. And it's something that's just stood the test of time. So I don't really think that the story, if you know what happens in the story, it's really going to change a lot for you. But I wouldn't have Philip on here not talk about what's actually in the text, guys. So if you're hoping for this to be spoiler free, I'll say read it. You need to read it. It's a very important story that I think any fantasy lover needs to read. I think it's important that we go back and see these foundations. And this is like the foundation, you guys. I mean, this is it. So
this is it. Yeah.
Do you think
as far as the spoilers?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say about the spoilers. The poem spoils itself. You know that Beowulf is going to beat Grendel. You know that he's going to beat Grendel's mother, and you know he's going to die when he meets the dragon. It spoils itself. So I don't think that the way we traditionally think of plot is really the point of that. We'll talk about that more later, though. So go ahead. Yeah.
So do you think that Tolkien, his interest in his story is really kind of what popularized this for 20th century audiences? I mean, I've heard kind of people debate upon this, but I've heard it is a debate.
It sure didn't hurt. And I think that his essay called Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics is actually maybe arguably the most important essay ever written on Beowulf, because it really did change the scene as far as Beowulf criticism goes. Essentially, it was a plea to read the poem as a work of literature, not as a mine for historical archaeological factoids, not as some kind of clumsy, barbaric attempt to imitate the great epics of Greek and Roman tradition, not as, there were lots of different scholars in that particular essay. If you want to read Tolkien totally dissing his scholarly peers, it's a great essay to read.
In the nicest way possible, by the way. Yeah.
Well, he had a pretty wry sense of humor, actually. So it's a really brilliant essay, but it's essentially a plea to let's read this as a work of literature. And also, I think interestingly, and I think this is something we can talk about, we can elaborate on, but one of his fundamental points is that Beowulf everybody talks about it as if it's an epic. And Tolkien asserts, and I agree with him, it's really not an epic. It's more of a lament. It's an elegy, an elegy on an individual level for the people of the poem, but even more, I think, poignantly, it's an elegy for the past. It's a Christian poet looking back on his pagan ancestors with a sense of admiration for their courage, facing the chaos, facing the darkness in the best way they could, with courage, with loyalty, and ultimately they were going to lose. They were going to die. They were going to be essentially like the gods of Germanic mythology. The darkness was going to swallow them, and Ragnarok and all of that. So it's this courage in the face of certain doom that is deeply admirable. But the Christian poet looking back on the centuries with a sense of sorrow and admiration on this, I think, and that's really the point of the poem in many ways.
So let's talk about your interest and experience with this story. I mean, obviously, I was forced to read it in high school. I think that's going to be a lot of people's origin story with this tale. But with you, did it happen that way? Did you find this interest on your own? And kind of what led to this just being like something that you've revisited so many times? And I believe you've actually taught before, correct?
Oh, yes. I teach it every semester. And I do use the Seamus Heaney translation, which I also have here in the Norton Anthology, the critical edition, the Norton and Critical edition, which I highly recommend, by the way. The Heaney book that you have there is probably the one that most people are going to see, but the Norton Critical edition contains not only the translation, but a lot of really helpful essays in the back. Among them, Tolkien's Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics. So, but I don't even remember, honestly. I think I did read it in high school. And it probably was something that I found very interesting, knowing that it was a source of inspiration for Tolkien. But I didn't get really heavily into it until college, when my summer before my senior year, I took an extra class in historical linguistics, and I started to learn Old English. And I realized that this was my passion. This was just, I went to a very unconventional college where I was able to essentially design my own entire senior year. I essentially worked with one professor, and I would meet with him every week. And I learned Old English and Old Norse that year. And so,
like we all do.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, a thing that people do.
Like taking algebra too, no big deal.
Yeah, it's one of those things. So yeah, I went all in. I went all in, and part of it was my love for Tolkien. I'll be honest. I was captured by Tolkien's presentation of this era in literature, because I knew that it informed a lot of his own writing. I mean, the Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion is full of the uber theme of Old English poetry is the fleetingness of life. the idea that nothing will last, everything will disappear. And how do we respond to that? How do you respond to the inevitability of our mortality? And the Old English response was, as I said before, courage in the face of certain doom. There's this wonderful poem they call the Battle of Malden, which tells a very idealized version of an actual battle between Vikings and Old English. And the Vikings were slaughtering the Old English. But to make a long story short, but there's this poem that has this one English warrior reciting these lines: Hia shall the hedra, herta the kenra, mod shall the mara to urmayan litlaf, which is essentially something like our purpose shall be the harder. Hia shall the hedra, herta the kenra, our hearts shall be the keener. Mod shall the mara, our courage shall be greater. The urmayan litlaf, as our strength lessens. So in other words, as we face this inevitable doom, we're going to face it with the greatest courage and strength we can muster, right?
You guys can't tell me he isn't passionate about this. You hear this? This is like me, like reciting like Huttese or something, talking about Star Wars. It's pretty impressive.
Exactly. Yeah,
very impressive. So I would put this up there, obviously, with some of the, when you talk about like these stories that are so ancient, we don't even know when they were written. I put it with like the Iliad and Odyssey, Art of War, things like that. So 1300 years later, why would you say that this story has persevered like it has, where it's still just so relevant today?
Yeah, well, because it speaks to the human experience. We're all going to face death. We all, even before our own personal and our loved ones will pass away. And it is something that I think great literature, helps us to wrestle with. And Beowulf is, for me, a very poignant statement on how some people in the past have coped with this, how they have decided to proceed with life and with a sense of courage and appreciation. And it's as if there's a wonderful passage in a really important, it's actually originally in Latin by this fellow named Beta, and they call him the Venerable Beta. Wouldn't you like to earn a nickname like that? Venerable
yeah.
Mike?
I've got some nicknames, but they ain't nothing that nice.
Yeah. But Beta wrote this history of it's actually the ecclesiastical history of the English people. So he was focused on the church when the Anglo-Saxons became Christianized. But he told the story of the conversion to Christianity from paganism. And there's this wonderful passage where he tells the story of this one king, Edwin of Northumbria, who was he was approached by a missionary. And he told him all about it. And he said, okay, let me confer with my boys here, with my thanes, and we'll have a palaver about this. So he says, what do you think, guys? And his advisors all had different opinions. And one of them said something really, I think, profound. He said, life is like this. We're all sitting around in the mead hall and listening to the bard tell one of the old tales, bringing to life the deeds of our ancestors. And outside, it's dark, it's night, and it's winter, and there's a storm raging. And in the hall, in one end of the hall, because they had to have windows, big windows to let out all the smoke from the fire pit, right? So in one end of the hall flies a sparrow, and it flies straight through the hall and out the other end. And that's life. What comes before this brief moment when we're here together, gathered around the fire, is darkness. We don't know what it is. And what comes after is darkness. But we're here together, making meaning of this, making sense of this as best we can. And that is life. And it's just a beautiful passage in that particular story. So, and that sense of, I think, of being surrounded by that darkness, but making meaning here and now is something that is pervasive in Old English poetry, and I think in a lot of fantasy as well. It's a big theme in fantasy, right?
Absolutely. No, that's all right, guys. I'm kind of speechless after that one. But we're going to talk about the story now. We're going to talk about, like, it breaks it into really 3 acts here. You've got Grendel, then you got Grendel's mother, and of course the dragon. These are your 3 main parts here. So, like I said, this will be spoilers. So proceed at your own risk. But again, I don't think that that's anything that's going to stray you from wanting to read this book, because people, I feel like they either have a, like keep it away from me, or they're like, I'd really like to do that one day. So hopefully that's the goal here, is to get more people to check it out. So I hope this doesn't ruin it for you. But if you got to come back later, we do understand. So let's start with Grendel here. That's just the first part. Something that I did not recall from my first reading is that Grendel is he's named a descendant of Cain. And if you guys haven't read your Bible, Cain killed his brother Abel. God banished him from the Garden of Eden. So I had no idea about that. So I didn't know if this is where I first started, like the flag went up, like, is this stuff that was in the original, or is this stuff that Tolkien's kind of, filling in on his own? I mean, we always know about his religious beliefs and things like that. So that just really surprised me right off the bat here.
Yeah, that is actually a very important point. And it is in the original. I said before that the poet was a Christian looking back on his pagan ancestors. So the story of a hero going and slaying a troll-like monster that had been persecuting a group of individuals in their hall and massacring the warriors and that sort of thing. And then the hero killing that monster, killing that troll, and that troll getting away with its missing an arm and making its way to some kind of aquatic hideout where the hero tracks that monster in order to finish him off, but also there meets the monster's mother and has a harder time fighting the mother than the original monster. That's an old story that was around long before. That's a story that had been handed down for generations before this Christian poet got a hold of it. We know this because there are analogs in Old Norse. You find a very similar, almost beat for beat story in the saga of Grettir the Strong, for example. So this is an old story that this individual took and repurposed for his own agenda, let's say. And so the idea of Grendel being the descendant of Cain is something that this particular poet brought to the story. And I think it, from his perspective, from a modern perspective, he's like, what? That you're combining this old folktale kind of thing, Germanic, pagan stuff with a very, what we would perceive as a Christian element. For the poet, it made perfect sense. Why? Because what is Grendel? What is Grendel's mother? It's very clear what the poet thinks of them as. They are the forces of chaos and darkness. They come from outside. They cannot stand the creation. Herot is, of all things, it's the creation of civilization. It's order. It's bringing order and civilization to the world. And this is something that Grendel is just opposed to, because that's what he is. He's a representation of chaos and darkness. So when he hears the bard in the hall, Herot, singing the song of creation, right? It's the song of creation. It's the song of establishing order, right? So that's why Grendel, it's not just the noise, it's the idea that this is creation, which is opposed to chaos. And so when he attacks, it's an attack on order, it's an attack on civilization, and civilization needs a hero to defend it, right? And of course, there's nobody around in the Danish mead hall to defend them from that. So the idea that Grendel is a descendant of Cain. Now, who was Cain? You said he's the original murderer. He's the one who killed his brother Abel. So he became an outlaw. He was literally kicked out for this crime. Cain is an outlaw. He's outside of society, which is exactly what Grendel and his mother are. They are outsiders to society. They are outside of the law. They are chaos. They are opposed to order and civilization. So for the poet, it's a direct association, because oral formulaic poetry is associative. So that's why it doesn't proceed the way we perceive stories that they should go, like with following a plot, right? It's very associative. Kind of like the way my mother would tell a story. Like she would start telling a story and then, and that reminds me, and, and she would talk about this other thing. And then, 5 stories later, we get back to the first story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, see, that's what I was talking about, because he talks about this song of creation triggering Grendel here. Me, I was just like, yeah, the Danes are partying too loud, and Grendel says, nice place you have there. It would be a shame if someone came and took it from you. That's kind of the way I took it here. So this is why we have Philip on to explain exactly what's going on. But I do like then the Geats show up, led by Beowulf, obviously. Apparently, he just loves him a challenge, right? This is you're a typical hero of a fantasy story who's like, okay, well, no one else can do this, but you know what? I can do it. And he comes up flexing on the shore here. And I kind of love this. He just basically just walks up like a WWE wrestler and is like, I got this. Ain't no big deal. You know what? I'm going to fight him without armor and without weapons too, because I want this to be a fair fight, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Pure bravado. I love it.
So what, one of the things at the heart of the pagan heroic ethos is the idea of doing great deeds in order to make your name last. Because if you really believe that everything's going to end in darkness, what's your response to that? Well, one response is to say, all right, I'm going to do something really awesome so people will talk about me. And that's my stab at immortality, so to speak. So this is what he's doing. He's showing up. Yes, partly because Hrothgar helped out his dad when he had been involved in a bit of a feud. So that's there. But also Beowulf is after fame. He's after doing great deeds. He wants to make his name, and all that boasting and everything. That's part of the deal, right? And the guy who challenges him, Unferth, who says, "Hey,
the swimming match." Yeah, I do like the Beowulf was like, he explains it, and he's like, by the way, I noticed you haven't been ready to challenge Grendel.
Yeah,
I fought like
he drops
sea creatures. That's why I lost that swimming match to Brecca. Yeah,
exactly. He had to kill 9 of these sea monsters, and then he drops the thing at the end where. And by the way, I know that you killed your own brother. So,
by the way, yeah, if there was a mic, he was dropping it right there. So yeah. But he's good physically. Which is, of course, he can kick some ass verbally as well. So good for him.
Exactly. And there's a word for that. Of course, in modern times, we would call it like a rap battle or something.
Yeah, slam poetry.
But in Old English, it's called a flyting.
Yeah,
that's what that is.
Assassin's Creed Valhalla video game I'm playing with, obviously about Vikings, and it has flighting in it. And I just thought that was such a nice touch.
Nice, very nice. I should play more video games if I had time.
I think you'd love that one. But so they have the fight, obviously, and he just straight up rips the guy's arm off, rips off Grendel's arm, and basically presents it to Hrothgar as a trophy. He probably isn't going to live. I mean, obviously, you want to bring a head to him, to prove your kill. But hey, here's this giant arm. I think you know what's going to happen after this, and he doesn't go suture that up and be okay. He's as good as dead, and they party.
Yeah. They party, and they tell stories, right? And which is significant. All these side stories that some people, from a modern perspective, it might seem like they interrupt the plot. Okay, so these stories of Hildebert, right? This woman who was essentially married off by the Danes to a rival tribe, and in order to make peace between them because they had been enemies. And Hildeberg's family, the Danes, come visiting one time, and the feud erupts in the middle of the feast, and then a whole bunch of people get killed, right? And so they end up having a funeral, which is described in graphic terms: the funeral pyre, the burning of the bodies, the popping of the head as the flames are eating, the blood spurting out of the wounds.
This
and
is
all
original
that.
grimdark stuff, guys, right here. This is it.
Oh yeah. And so Hildebert, she loses her son and her brother in that conflict, and they're on the funeral pyre, and they make this sort of truce. They're like, all right, we got a winter here. Either we kill it, everybody gets killed, or we just sort of stay together. And the Danes are like, okay, fine. But before they leave, the Danes ultimately do reignite the feud and kill all of the others and bring home Hildebert. So it's a tragic story. Why would you sell that in the middle of a feast where you're celebrating the end of this persecutor, Grendel? It's an interesting question. And I think it's about the theme that is pervading this poem, which is that life is fleeting. All of our attempts to build civilization, all of our attempts to establish order are ultimately pretty fragile in the face of this vast darkness. So this story reinforces that. And it's linked to Beowulf's own eventual story. It's linked to what's happening with the Danes, and knowing that Heorot eventually is going to be, burned down by something similar, where Hrothgar marries off his daughter, Freyawaru, to a rival tribe in order to try to make peace. And Beowulf, when he comes home to Hygelac, his uncle and king, says, I don't think that's going to work out so well. And we know it didn't historically, because there are stories of it not working out. So all this is just to say that life is fleeting. we are here for a moment. Make the best of it you can.
So I think telling a story like that after a big victory is where the phrase "I bet you're right" at parties came from, because let's talk about being a wet blanket. But what you said earlier about this not being an epic, being a lament, I think this was an epic. Yeah, this fight with Grendel would have been like, if this was a regular fantasy book, guys, this would have been 100 pages. It would have been like the biggest knockdown, drag out fight ever. It's a few lines, So it's and I think that's why you also see where Tolkien kind of takes that on his own, where you would always say that he'll take a paragraph to describe a hill, but he'll take 2 sentences to describe a battle, So
yeah, it's true.
Easy to see those influences. So let's move to Grendel's mother here, who's out on a revenge tour. I forget his name, which I'm sure you'll remember. He kills Hrothgar's like his best man, basically. And that's where they said, okay, we got to kick ale something. Look, I watch a lot of Viking drama shows, and everyone has an ale or an eighth at the beginning of their name, so they all kind of blend together for me. But,
yeah, there are a lot of confusing names. Yeah.
So what I think is really kind of funny about this, and of course I'll put it in the layman's terms here for everybody. They see this lake with these big scary things coming out of it, and Beowulf's like, "Hey, let's jump in there."
Yeah, with chainmail on.
Yeah, no big deal. No big deal. Hey, he was justified in that one. It kind of saves his ass a few times here, but again, just the bravado of this character is just machismo in bunches here. I love it.
Absolutely, yeah. Poor Ashera is. It is a great moment too when Grendel's mother avenges him, right? It's a very powerful moment where we see Hrothgar break down in tears because he was very close to this particular thane, this advisor, and we see that he's broken up about this, and they ask Beowulf, who had been sleeping somewhere else and didn't know about the incident until afterwards. Otherwise, he would have prevented it probably. But he comes along and they tell him about it, and then there's this exchange where Beowulf says words that are basically I think the greatest expression of the pagan heroic ethos out there. And I'm going to quote the Heaney translation, which I have here handy. And like I said, the Tolkien translation has weird line numbers because it's a prose translation, so I have a hard time finding. But I can remember the line numbers from the poem. So I'm going to quote the Heaney translation. Beowulf says, "Wise sir," he's talking to Hrothgar, "wise sir, do not grieve. It is always better to avenge dear ones than to indulge in mourning. For every one of us living in this world means waiting for our end. Let whoever can win glory before death. When a warrior is gone, that will be his best and only bulwark." Right? So you see the heroism, you see the courage, you see the doing great deeds to make your name last a little bit beyond your own mortality, and you see vengeance. And that was part of the pagan heroic ethos that the Christian poet probably had some, in Christianity, you're supposed to turn the other cheek and all that, right? It's not about all of it, just vengeance, right? So it was a little bit problematic for our Christian poets at times. Even this whole let's do great deeds so we can have fame, right? From the Christian perspective, there's something very futile about it, right? So Beowulf's response is, like you said, machismo, right? I mean, he's going to go there. He dives in the mirror.
Act first, think last. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And this is the young Beowulf too, right? So, I mean.
So the part that actually was like, maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe you can kind of give me some context for what this is trying to say. Unferth gives him his sword to fight Grendel's mother, and that sword has no effect. But and then of course his chainmail does save him there. But hey, there's this random giant sword hanging on the wall. Hey, that works. I mean, it's just like, okay. I mean, I guess that was convenient, but was I missing something he was trying to tell me here about Unferth's sword? Was it just, I don't know, was it like a matter of respect because they were, banging heads at first, and now he was giving him his own sword to fight this beast with?
Yeah, so Unferth tries to make up with Beowulf and gives him his sword to help him out, hunting, which proves to be not quite adequate. And we did learn earlier, right, when Beowulf was fighting with Grendel, how his followers, Beowulf's followers, tried to help, and they were smacking Grendel with their swords, and Grendel was impervious to iron. He was impervious to weapons of that sort. So it's actually a fortunate thing that Beowulf decided to fight him with just kind of wrestling, right? Because he couldn't be defeated. There's some magic at play. And it might be that Grendel's mother also has the same, whatever it is, magic that makes her impervious to blades. Except that this blade that is happened to be lying around amongst all the other treasure, presumably stolen by the Grendel family over the years, over the centuries. This particular sword was made way back in the day. It was said to be made by giants, right? Untitled Chapter, the old works of giants, right? Ent being the word for giant, which obviously Tolkien used in his own writing. So it has magical properties. It's something from ancient times that has it has potency that cannot be duplicated by modern weaponry, right? So it's fortunate for Beowulf that it's there, and he uses it and cuts off Grendel's mother's head with it. Otherwise, he would have been in trouble, because it's clear that he has actually a harder time with Grendel's mother than he did with Grendel.
Yeah, it makes me think of prophecy. Yeah, the prophecies are great, but they're written a long time ago. Like, for example, which Tolkien used with the Witch King of Angmar. No man can kill me, that kind of thing. So yeah, I can see that now. Okay, but yeah. It's just a really ancient sword. I get that. Yeah, this was made long before we wrote those rules. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. So this might be where they come from, but it's again the Christian poet, sort of in his way, just like with Cain, bringing in his own understanding of these things, because the sword is said to be, he related to the story in Genesis of the giants who were all destroyed by the flood, right? So he related to them as well, and for him that makes perfect sense. And you notice that he always inserts passages about God and monotheism, when Beowulf and Hrothgar and company, they're all pagans, right? They believed in Odin and Thor, and not one mention of Odin or Thor in the entire poem, which is probably because the Anglo-Saxons had only recently been converted to Christianity, and there were probably many of them still worshiping Odin and Thor. So to mention those names would be even probably a bad PR, right? So the idea of making Beowulf and Hrothgar sort of virtuous monotheists, right? That there's no mention of the Gospels, by the way, only the Hebrew scriptures. So they make them kind of like the ancient Hebrew people, these virtuous monotheists that we can identify with them, right? They're not worshiping all these Odin and Thor and all that. They're just, they're misled, but, they're okay. Except when they go back to worshiping at pagan shrines and all of that in desperation, right? So it's an interesting mixture that the Christian poet is sort of, he's got a fine line to walk here. If he had written all about Odin and Thor, there's a very good chance this manuscript would not have survived.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, that makes sense. But he does find Grendel dead, so he's able to get his kill confirmation. So hey, got my head now to go along with your arm. He's getting a whole collection here for Hrothgar, and they keep up this sword giving act, and he gives him his sword. Is it Nagling? Is that what it was called? I'm reading like 12 fantasy.
That's the later sword, yeah.
Nagling.
Yeah,
so I mean, this basically makes Beowulf his heir, correct? I mean, this is a big family heirloom.
Well, it's interesting because Hrothgar's wife, Wealhtheow, is worried about that. Yeah. And there's a point in the feasting and the celebrating where she, after he kills Grendel's mother, she comes up to him and says, you're going to support my boys, right?
Yeah.
And Beowulf is, not to worry. Things are fine. It looks a little bit like Hrothgar almost wants to adopt Beowulf here, right? And there's a real bond formed between them. But Beowulf doesn't not become Hrothgar's heir. He leaves and goes back home to his tribe, the Geats, and also, interestingly, is faithful to his uncle and his cousin as in a similar way. It's interesting, though, because Hrothgar's nephew, Hrothulf, does end up killing his cousins and taking over. He's a very famous figure in Old Norse stories. Hrolf Kraki, the same Hrothulf is. Told his story is major. The saga of Hrolf Kraki is a big deal. But in here, he's a bit of a villain in a way because he kills his cousins, Hrothgar's sons, in order to become the king of the Danes.
Sure.
So it's ironic that she's asking Hrothulf and Beowulf, please be nice to my boys, support them when they become. And Beowulf is like, no problem. But Hrothulf is eventually going to kill them.
So yeah, sure I will. I'll make sure I watch their backs really, really well.
Yeah, exactly.
So when we talk about part 3, the dragon here, now this is 50 years later. So obviously we're dealing with a Beowulf that's not quite the, he still thinks he's the macho man that he used to be, but Father Time is still undefeated, you guys. But before we get into that, whatever, I got to just talk about, I talk all the time about how Tolkien influenced just about every writer that we read today at one point or another. And for me, this one where I realized, holy hell, this is a story that really influenced The Hobbit. I really could not see enough parallels between this and Hobbit. It's just, to me, it was like just blown away. Of like, obviously we know Tolkien didn't start this stuff. He's just, the one who really popularized it. But seeing his influences obviously is something that's really just kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of magical here. Because I was stunned with just how many parallels I saw with this. Obviously, the Dragon of Smaug, Wiglaf, I see a lot of Bard the Bowman in. Just there's tons of things here. It's just, it was just really cool to experience that. And then, of course, as I'm reading a Tolkien translation, I'm like, the light bulb went off. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I never saw this before.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And of course, there's the cup, which is stolen from the dragon's hoard, which is the catalyst, which pisses off the dragon and makes the dragon come out of his lair and wreak havoc and destroy. And so it is most definitely one of the most deliberate nods you can ever see in all of Tolkien, from, of course, The Hobbit, where Bilbo steals a cup and it pisses off Smaug. The other tribute here in the exchange between Bilbo and Smaug is that other dragon I was talking about with Sigurd in the Volsunga saga. When he kills Fafnir, there's this whole exchange between them where Fafnir wants to know his name so that he can curse him. And Sigurd has to come up with very creative, evasive answers, like Bilbo saying, I'm Barrel Rider, and putting all these little riddles in there. So that's another nod in that same scene to the other famous dragon of Germanic lore. Yeah.
Man, guys, everyone has an influence. And you know what? There's nothing wrong wearing those influences on your sleeve a little bit. I think there's nothing wrong with that. So so someone steals a golden cup from the dragon. The dragon decides to start some shit. And, Beowulf, no longer Mr. Tough Guy, but he still thinks he is, says, I got to fight this dragon. You know what, though? I got to do it alone, because that's just the way that he does things, right? So,
yep.
70 years old.
And that decision,
do this.
That has major repercussions, because he tells his warriors, you guys stay back. I'll handle this, right? And he dies. And it's even very loyal Wiglaf points out, that sometimes, a decision made by one person can have repercussions that are disastrous for the group. And that's going to happen to us. It's prophesied. It's going to happen that the Geats, without this strong leader to protect them, because there are all these feuds that are being talked about between the Geats and the Swedes, especially. And this is going to end in the Geats being annihilated. Historically, this happened, actually. The tribe, the Gotar, were assimilated by the Swedes during this exact historical period. So there is some kind of historical nod here going on as well. But the fact is that Beowulf acted out of this desire for fame. This, you could call it pride even. And it has negative consequences. This could be the Christian poet struggling, still admiring Beowulf clearly, but struggling with the idea of the pagan response to mortality being ultimately futile, right? The sense of futility is pervasive in this particular part of the poem.
I read this as, Beowulf, obviously, like you said, he's all about building his legacy. And he looked at this as, you know what? I'd rather burn out than fade away. I'd rather go out, fight a dragon than just dying of old age in my bed. So I'm not saying that he knew he was going to die. I'm just saying he said, if this is the way I got to go, I mean, what better way to go than fighting a freaking dragon? But I do like the part where his men come to help, and then they're like, F this, we're out of here. And they just take off and leave everybody except Wiglaf, who then does call them cowards at the end. And I did. Yeah, it was sad. It's very sad.
Yeah, it was sad. And of course, Wiglaf points out, Beowulf wasted all this treasure, these weapons that he bestowed on you guys, because in the moment of need, you were cowering over there in the trees. But it's interesting that the whole treasure thing as well that happens here.
Yeah, they burn them. They burn the treasure with the funeral pyre.
Yeah. Okay. So here's this vast hoard that was, interestingly, I talked about futility earlier, the idea of this treasure, where it comes from. There's this beautiful passage in there called the Lay of the Last Survivor, where this ancient people had been basically decimated by war and disease, and they had one last survivor who is reflecting on all the loss, and the grief is just so poignant here. And he's burying this treasure in a cavern under the earth, returning all this gold and precious stuff back to where it came from, and lamenting the passage of his people. Again, there's this whole fleetingness thing, and that's the hoard that the dragon finds. And it's cursed, by the way. It's a cursed treasure hoard. And this is the one that the some kind of slave comes along and steals the cup and awakens the dragon's ire. So this sense of futility, though, continues when what do they do with the treasure? They put it in Beowulf's burial mound on his funeral pyre, and then they bury it. What good does it do anyone there, right? It's so interesting and so powerful because, of course, the whole thing opened up with a funeral too, right? The funeral in the beginning of Beowulf was the funeral of the ancestor of the Danish kings, Scyld, who was this great king who started this dynasty, and there's this story of his greatness, but then he dies, and they put his body on a ship and they put it out to sea, and it goes, who knows? The ocean is a great metaphor for the great unknown. And it ends with another very pagan funeral, right? With Beowulf going up in flames, along with all this treasure, which ultimately doesn't really help anyone, does it?
Yeah, made me think of the end or death of Arthur in the Morte Arthur.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a lot of parallel there. So, yeah, it's easy to see now where I like going back further and further and further. Like I can't wait till I read Art of War and see like how many people pulled stuff from that. So, and I've read Odyssey, but never read Iliad. So,
oh wow, yeah, Iliad's great. Yeah.
I hope I am able to understand it as well as I understood this version. At least I think I did, because I was expecting some things here that I said and you'd be like, that didn't happen.
No, you nailed it. You nailed it. I do think it helps not to think of this as an epic, but as a lament. And even what Tolkien says in his essay, the Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics, he compares it to almost like a painting, a juxtaposition of two sides, essentially. And there are a lot of dichotomies. There's a lot of dualisms in the poem. There's light and dark, there's good and evil, and there's youth and age. And so Tolkien, unfortunately, he sort of skips over a lot of the Grendel mother parts, and I think he just kind of lumps her in with Grendel. And I think she deserved more attention. That's the one flaw, I think, in his essay, is that he ignores Grendel's mother for the most part.
So that's expanded more in the Heaney version, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, no, they're both translating directly from the original poem. But in terms of Tolkien's essay, he talks a lot about Grendel. He talks a lot about the dragon. He doesn't say anything. Okay. Yeah, he doesn't say much about Grendel's mother. But anyway, I think he's essentially right, though, that you could think of it as a three-part with Grendel, Grendel's mother, and the dragon, or you could think of it as a two-part consisting of Grendel and Grendel's mother, which is the adventure of Beowulf's youth, right? And then there's the dragon, which is his old age. And these are really just two moments in a life, and they are juxtaposed to each other. You have youth and age. And what might be appropriate to youth, this act of heroism that we admire, might not be so appropriate for a king who, by the way, has responsibilities. He's not this bachelor warrior who has no responsibilities. He's essentially got a whole people depending on him. So when he goes out in a blaze of glory, yeah, it's good for him, and the bards will be singing his song, et cetera, like he wanted, but the Geats are going to be wiped out as a result. So there is something, I think, very poignantly sorrowful. And when you see the Geats at his funeral, they are lamenting the loss of their great leader, but they're also lamenting the passage of their own people and the passage of time and mortality. It's a universal lament, I think, that we can all relate to.
Yeah, I see a lot of death and renewal as a theme in this story for sure. You talk about the beginning and ending with a funeral. It's a good parallel. So I think the best way that I can repay you for doing this is to make you read some more and have you finally read Michael Crichton with Eaters of the Dead, which is basically his interpretation of it. Was actually a challenge. Associate said there was no way you can make Beowulf entertaining, and he said challenge accepted. And he basically took two different kind of stories that were similar and kind of combined them there. And I would love to come on your channel and talk to you about that after you read it, because obviously being a big Crichton guy,
a deal.
And seeing how you feel like this as an interpretation of Beowulf, I think that would be a great discussion to have. But yeah, this was fun.
That is a deal.
I think reading it the way that I did, I would recommend doing that for everybody. Just read small bites. I think I read about, 100, 200 lines per night, every night for, a few weeks. I feel like this is the best way, because I say all the time, guys, like I'm reading what Tad Williams right now, and I say that's not a story you can binge. You have to. This is different. I feel like any kind of story like this, just binging it, you're going to miss so much context, and it's just not. This is definitely not something you just want to get through. I think it's something that's best to slowly digest it, and that's what I also want to do when I do finally read Art of War here pretty soon.
Cool. Yeah, it is a deal, actually, Mike. That is such a great idea. I would love to have you on the channel to talk about Eaters of Dead. So I will fit that into my TBR.
It's about as short as this one is, honestly. It really isn't that long.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
It's actually
cool.
easy to read, but I think you'll like Crichton, because he does put footnotes and he lists his sources and things like that. So I think that that'll be a writer that perfect gateway for you for Crichton. I think would definitely be that story, because knowing how much you do love and appreciate and like to spread the love for this story. And I think that you should put up your camera one time when you're teaching this in class and then distribute it on your channel. I think that would be a really good, like us getting to audit your class. I don't know how your university would feel about that, but just
I don't know. I don't know if there would be any like legal issues or that or not. But I feel like BookTube has become, in a way, like the most fun classroom I've ever been in. So, and that is no knock on my students who I absolutely love. But this is so much bigger because we're talking to people all over the world. We're talking to people who universally want to be here, right? They want to read these stories and talk about it. They're excited for it. And as much as I love my students, honestly, not all of them are excited to necessarily read it.
Yeah. I gotta say, when I started this channel, if you ever told me I'd be talking about Beowulf on it, I would say there's no way. So I love the avenues that this thing has opened here. So I have no problems going. Turn the clock back, because like I said, I loved it. It's like when you first get into music, and then you're like, well, who influenced that artist that I love, and who influenced them, and who influenced them. I always compare reading to music in that way, that you want to go back and learn about the roots when you get really interested in something, because it's important to you. Like for me, at least it is. I wanted to know who influenced Guns N' Roses, and then I want to know who influenced Aerosmith. Then I want to know who influenced the Beatles, stuff like that. It was always just kind of a reverse thing for me. It's very much like that with me in reading. I want to know who these influences are.
Oh, yeah.
Now I can see J.R.R. Tolkien's influence, obviously his primary one. I'm like, wow, this is really, really special. So these things are rewarding, guys. They shouldn't be treated as, homework, like I said. And I was kind of going into that attitude.
A lot of our favorite authors, you can name them. You can find, like, John Gwynne is clearly an admirer of Beowulf. You can even see it in Molassen, more so with Esselmont than with Erickson, but with both of them, honestly, they've read their Beowulf. I know that. So you can see it. It's just pervasive. It's everywhere. I'm sure that the vast majority of fantasy authors, even today, know their Beowulf, right? And some of them are very open about the inspiration. I think it's a cool thing to read and realize, like you said, I love finding out where influences came from and how they work, and how these authors have put their own spin on these themes that have been so universal that human beings have been wrestling with since our existence.
And that's why it's a story that stood the test of time here. And I think that we'll be talking about it long after we're gone, guys. So I love to just pass these things on to the next generation. That's what we're here for. That's what us esteemed gentlemen of YouTube, as I like to call us, not old, we like to do with the classics here, just kind of pass that knowledge forward to the next generation, so it stays relevant. I figure that's why the story is stuck around, because it just keeps getting passed on and on and on and on and on. So I don't see it stopping anytime soon. So I was excited to talk about this. I'm glad that we finally got to do it. And again, guys, I told you there was going to be no structure with this, but I was actually pretty structured, I think. I thought we were just going to be like, hey,
pretty good, yeah.
What happens. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to do it. I know your schedule's. I think you're about to finish your Malazan reread, right?
Yeah, I mean, I finished Dust of Dreams, but AP, I'm just kind of waiting for him a little bit at this point because he just had a bunch of stuff going on professionally, and
It happens.
so he's just very very busy. Yeah, he works and life happens and all that. So we're just waiting a little bit on that, and then once I want to stay in sync with him. So when he's ready, we'll do Dust of Dreams, and then we'll read the Crippled God, and actually we'll read Assail last, which is the last book in Esselmont's novels of the Malazan Empire, and then we'll be done. Yeah,
So
so
my
we're almost
point there is
there.
I didn't want to throw something into your busy reading schedule with Eaters of the Dead.
Oh yeah,
I think
yeah,
your reading speed, you would read Eaters. I reread it earlier, late last year, and I reread it in a couple of days.
yeah.
I think you do the same. But yeah,
Cool.
anytime you want to do that, I would love to talk about it because it's one I think I had a greater appreciation at this age, obviously, than I did. And I loved it the first time, but I looked at it as an action story the first time I read it. Now looking at it, I'm like, wow, okay. I read the foreword by Crichton talking about the Beowulf influence. I'm like, wow, I had no idea this was kind of like a retelling. And then I couldn't not
Yeah,
see it. I could not see it after I reread it. So I'll be interested to talk
yeah.
to you about that whenever you want to, but obviously no rush.
Marvelous. No, I'm excited for it. We will fit it in the next month or two for sure. Yeah.
Outstanding. Well, you enjoy the rest of your weekend. I know you got spring break coming up. My wife is bragging
Yes.
about not having school next week, and I'm like, I hate you, but I'm happy for you. But hopefully you don't spend the whole time grading papers.
I think only half of it. So yeah,
Outstanding.
I'll be
All right,
having some
man.
fun.
Well,
Yeah.
enjoy it, and I thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Mike. This, as you know, I've been so excited for this, and not only because it's Beowulf, but I always enjoy talking with you.
Likewise.
So thank you for having me on your channel. It's an honor and a pleasure. And thank you also to your viewers for checking this out.
Likewise, and we will talk very, very soon.